Hello, my name is Cyby. This is my going to be my first YouTube video. Um, and it's titled Linux is Fun, but we'll get into that. I want to briefly introduce who I am. Um, I am Cyby. I have quite a lot of experience using Linux mostly on the server, but I also have been maintaining a Manjaro Linux install. It has mostly been running Wayland window managers. Started with Sway. Um, Lately, been using Hyperland, and actually lately it's been Neri, but before that it was Hyperland. Um, so you know, I like Linux. I think Linux can be fun, but I did kind of use an interesting keyword there. I said that I have been maintaining. I've been maintaining um, my Linux distribution, and that I think is a very important distinction to make. That whereas it can be fun, sometimes it's actually not fun. But before we go into that, I kind of just wanted to briefly mention where I started. So I don't have um, a lot of my older, Linux stuff. So I'm going to be using screenshots to kind of show you a little bit of history about how I used to use Linux. So this is a screenshot from Ubuntu 8.04. I remember that exact wallpaper and that exact theme and setup because this was my first desktop. My first Linux desktop. Before that, it was mostly Windows XP. I did use Windows Vista. I don't recommend using Windows Vista for anything at all. But I then eventually uh, discovered Ubuntu. Um, this exact desktop actually came pre-installed on a Dell Dell Inspiron, I think it was, N14. It was a 14-inch laptop, and once I discovered that I could just order a Dell with Ubuntu pre-installed, and I was going into school anyways, I said, "Hey, why not? I'm going to do that. I'm going to, you know, have a Linux machine, a machine specifically built, at least I thought specifically built for Ubuntu." Um, I'll be honest, I didn't stick with the GNOME desktop for very long. I eventually switched over to KDE. This isn't my exact theme or anything. I definitely didn't have anything called Macintosh HD on my desktop, but I did like the idea of the kind of Mac style with like a global menu bar and everything. So this is KDE 3.5. When I quickly discovered that I could install Kubuntu just right in place from my Ubuntu installation by downloading a meta package, and I did that, and it got me, KDE 3.5. I do wish I had screenshots from mine because I had a nice, pretty, snow background on it, and it looked really cool. Um, Pun not intended. But this was my next desktop. I eventually ditched Kubuntu, and I went into using 3.5 KDE 3.5 on a on an Arch install. So I was an Archer. Um, I don't consider myself that anymore because I'm using Manjaro, but we'll get into that. And I enjoyed the heck out of KDE, and I used KDE on that Arch install I learned a lot about Linux using Arch and configuring Arch and maintaining Arch. There's that word again. Um, I really did enjoy it. I loved um, working with Arch. In fact, I eventually went into KDE 4. Um, I was one of the first. I think I was using a beta build, so I wasn't the first to use KDE 4, but I was one of them. I was using a beta build of KDE 4 on Arch, and then actually it may have even been an alpha. And for those who weren't there, this is 4.3, but for those who weren't there for the pre 4.0 days, there was a lot in KDE 4, or that was in KDE 3, that was not re-implemented in KDE 4. Even up until 4.3, 4.5, there's just a lot that wasn't there. So it was kind of an interesting uh, time to use Linux. Eventually, I had gotten, instead of that Dell Inspiron, which was a 14-inch laptop, was rather large. I had a friend of mine when I was working as a system administrator at the university. Actually, my supervisor had this old netbook that just it didn't have a working hard drive. The trackpad was shot. Um, and so he ended up giving that to me. The first thing I tried to put on it was this this interface. So it's still KDE 4, um, but it was the netbook interface. It was supposedly designed with less visual clutter and using space more wisely for a smaller monitor. In fact, every app opened in full screen, which was very interesting. But I had that. Um, and now what you see all of these screenshots in is Hyperland. And that's where I was for the longest time. Hyperland is an awesome window manager. And in fact, it's kind of becoming um, almost like a desktop environment replacement, sort of. They're building up this like ecosystem. What I have, actually, I can show you this. I have Hyperlock on here. Um, so that's the lock screen. I hastily entered the wrong password, but that's the lock screen that I have on here. There's HyperPolkat, a lot of other utils, HyperPaper, HyperCursor. So it's a good system, but it's still fairly new. In fact, Wayland is a lot better now, but it's all still kind of new. And there's been a couple of times, and fortunately, Hyperland warns you about this now, but there's been a couple of times where I go to log into my system and I get a nice little message that says, hey, there's a problem with your config. And so there's a problem somewhere with the Hyperland config. Now, to give you an idea, um, the Hyperland config is a rather large and, like any dot file, really, for any window manager. It's a rather large and complicated document. There's a lot of things in here. There's a lot of keys and switches and sections, and it can be somewhat unwieldy to work with all of this and to find exactly where what needs to be changed or what needs to be removed. And a lot of times what I end up going, and I'll see if I can find it, but what I end up going and doing is it does tell me when there's an error in my config. It tells me what line it's on, and so I'll go in here and and it looks like I don't have any more comments, but I'll either comment out the line, I'll just comment it out, or I will just delete it. um, so because rather than trying to figure out, how exactly to um, to work with, to make things work exactly the way they used to, I just don't have the time or energy to do that anymore. And so I end up with things like a broken tab bar where you can't even really, I mean, yes, the font is terribly small, but even without that, you can't even read it. You can't read the title. You can barely see that, and this isn't on the Hyperland developers. This isn't the fault of the Hyperland developers. This is me. This is me not wanting to take the time to make this look right and look the way it should look, um, because I'm busy. I have a lot of things going on, and I want to be able to just sit down at my machine and get work done. I don't want to uh, have to spend so much time worrying about and fixing and maintaining all of my dot files. And this is just one example. I have a waybar config. I have, which I'm not showing waybar right now, but I have a waybar config. I have configs for my, for Doom Emacs, which is the flavor of Emacs that I'm using here. I have configs for, um, sorry, it switched on me. I have configs for my terminal, which I'm using Kitty. Um, So, there's a lot that I have to maintain. And I think that's what makes Linux a little bit less fun now. Whereas when I first started using Linux, um, I enjoyed this. I loved being able to tinker. I loved being able to make the system mine. But with that flexibility comes a bit of uh, extra time and effort that needs to be put into maintaining the Linux system, going in and fixing the dot files and making sure that everything is up to date when you make any changes. There's a lot that needs to be done. But that isn't to say that Linux is not fun. In fact, I have more to show because I'm still using Linux. And here's the thing. Um, yes, there are other operating systems. There's BSD, which is going to be probably even worse to try and figure out how to maintain, um, because BSD, they say, Linux is Unix like and BSD is Unix, but BSD and Linux are entirely different. While I was working as that system administrator, the very first server that I was working on was a BSD server, it was a NetBSD server. Um, and I can tell you from experience there that maintaining a BSD system is far different from maintaining a from maintaining a Linux system. Like they're entirely different things, but and it's a lot more difficult in a lot of ways. So that's not a solution. But there's Windows. Like, why would I want to use Windows? I can't do anything. Windows 11 has a lot of system requirements. The current computer that I have has a TPM chip, can run a Windows VM, but wouldn't actually install Windows 11 on it. Um, but that's, of course, just talking about the system requirements of Windows. There's the whole Microsoft ecosystem and throwing AI at you and all of the advertisements and bloatware that comes with Windows 11, which I'd have to remove. It's just not, it's not a solution. There's Mac OS. Mac OS is great. It's POSIX compliant. You can get some of the same terminals and things on Mac OS that you could do in Linux. You can even do a lot with Mac OS. I may even link some videos down in the description, uh, talking about some of the things you can do to make Mac OS, more more what you want it to be. But it's a proprietary system. You're still beholden to Apple actually supporting the avenues to make these tools work. It's just not the best thing, and it's not the best thing for my use case. So I'm still using Linux. Um, what I have done though is I'm no longer using Hyperland. Um, I am using uh, a scrolling window manager rather than the tiling window manager that you saw with Hyperland. I'm actually using something called Neri. Um, Neri is a fun different thing. I enjoyed I enjoyed kind of the scrolling nature of it. And you can see I have the Waybar now. Waybar is currently configured to work with Neri, not with Hyperland. So that's another thing that I have to uh, hold on. I need to resize that. There we go. That's another thing that I have to look at or maintain is the fact that I can, whereas Linux is flexible and it lets us use, all, and especially Wayland is very flexible and it lets us use all of these different tools and different compositors. Um, my Neri config, or my Waybar config, is set up in such a way where I have a bunch of widgets that only work with Neri. Actually, I guess I only have two that only work with Neri, and that's the Neri Workspaces and Neri Window. Yeah, I could probably get away with using WLR instead of Neri, but I'm mostly in Neri now. In fact, there is supposedly a Neri taskbar widget that they're working on for Waybar, that changes the way that the taskbar is reordered. But at least as of recording this video, that wasn't um, part of the core package yet. It's something that I'd have to compile separately, which again leads into the fact that I don't have a whole lot of time. So I just use the WLR package or taskbar widget, and I could use the WLR workspace and WLR window. But that could change the way things appear on the screen. It could change the formatting options that are available. You can see that I did have the Hyperland workspace widget for a while, but now I'm using the Neri one. So it's like there's things. Yes, it's fun. It's still fun. I do still like being able to use the system. I still prefer it over Windows or Mac OS, and when I do have time, it is great to go in here and try new things like Neri. In fact, I did that on a whim. I had some extra time, and I'm like, I want to try Neri, and so I installed it. I started configuring it, and then I ended up liking it. I liked it more um, than Hyperland. And before I discovered Neri, this video was going to be entirely different. It was going to be mostly negative comments about how I don't like, having to maintain Linux, and I don't like having to take the time to make sure that all of my configurations are up to date. And yeah, I did mention that, but in the end, yeah, this is entirely different than what it was going to be because I discovered something that was fun to set up. It was quick. It wasn't too difficult. Um, the Neri config mostly just set itself. I just had to change a couple colors. So what I'm trying to say is Linux is still fun. It might not always just work, um, but you can get it to work if you understand the system and you have the time, you can get it to work. But if you don't understand the system, or you don't have the time to understand the system or to get it to work, it can be tricky. It can be difficult. It can be daunting. And so, whereas some of us might find Linux fun, not everybody's going to find it fun. Um, Not everybody's going to want to do this. And I don't think it's right for us uh, to be elitist and to say, hey, you're not using your computer right because you're using Windows or because you're using Mac. Those two operating systems are perfectly good for some people. Some people just want something to work, and if you just want something to work, Mac OS for the most part is going to just work. Um, so I plan on showing off a little bit more with Manjaro, showing off a little bit more with the way the Neri, the window manager that I'm using now, and we'll talk about some Linuxy stuff as far as future videos for the channel, other than some stuff talking about Neri. Um, I am also going to make commentary about VTubing. We're going to make some commentary about just kind of things that happen in the world of tech. And hopefully you'll find this to be informative, and hopefully we'll all have fun and learn something. Maybe I'll do some let's plays with other things like games on Linux or things of that nature. But for now, um, I'm Cyby, and this is having fun with or Linux is fun.